Good evening, friends, and thank you for coming back after dinner. Not to be taken for granted, I know. One of the primary work before the core team in the coming year is to work toward a strategic vision and mission for our annual conference that will be presented to you at next year's annual conference session, so that it will be formed for us to launch into in the 2020 to 24 quadrennium. And so we begin with listening. We listened to one another last year. If you were here at annual conference session last year, you will remember that we had holy conversations then. And a number of circuits continued that holy conversation through the year. We continued to have those kinds of conversations and to listen to one another throughout the course of the Episcopal visits that happened beginning in February of this year. And we continue those conversations tonight. This is not the end of them. We will continue to listen through the year. I expect that there will be more listening sessions in various parts of the conference over the next 6 months. But tonight and tomorrow night are an important piece of gathering your stories and thoughts that will help us formulate a sense of what God is already doing among us in this annual conference. Where is life springing already? Where are the places that we might best fan the flame of the Spirit that is already happening in your local church and in many places around the conference? We know that we do this work in the context of the denominations situation. You've already heard a lot about that. We will talk more specifically about that tomorrow evening. And so you might be saying, all we do is talk. But we do talk a lot. And it's in part because we have unfinished business with one another. We still do not know each other well enough to trust one another, I think, in many ways. To actually build the bonds we still have work to do to build the bonds of community so that we can know and have confidence in one another in being about the same vision and mission, no matter how different we are from one another individually and how different the context of our local churches. So tonight, the primary work that we want to do in these small groups is to show up authentically with one another. We're going to invite you to tell some stories from your experiences in your local church, about your experiences as a member of this annual conference. And we are going to practice not only telling our stories, but hearing one another. We're going to stay in the same groups tomorrow evening so that you can work together from the bonds that you begin to create tonight with one another. And what we are hoping for is the kind of courageous conversations that Michelle talked about in the laity address this morning. There's an organization called Narrative 4. Perhaps you've heard of it. They do peacemaking work around the world. And their tagline is fearless hope through radical empathy. Their process is that they pair people who come from very different communities. They've done this work in Northern Ireland, they've done it in the Middle East, they've done it in schools in New York City. And the two people who are paired tell each other their stories, and they stay with those stories until the other person can tell your story. And what they've discovered is that when we know someone else's story clearly enough, feel it deeply enough that we can tell it, then we are more inclined to be empathetic toward that person and to want the best for them, no matter where we started off. So I will tell you more about what we're going to do in our small groups in just a moment, but let me tell you how you're going to be set up, and you may have some moving around to do. First of all, there is no in front of the bar and behind the bar for these 2 evenings. Everyone is invited and encouraged to participate, whether you are a registered member of the annual conference or not. If you are in the room, you are part of this conversation. The chairs are set up in groups of 6. Each group is intended to have 5 full participants and 1 note taker. There are a number of note takers who already know that's what they are in the room. In just a moment, we'll make sure that every group has a note taker. I am asking you to gather in your group of 6 with people who are not part of your local church. We want you to be in conversation with people you do not already know, and they should be a mix of clergy and lay people, okay? And so I'm gonna ask you, if you are not in a configuration that looks like that right now, would you kind of move around until you are? And now, let me ask you, if your group does not have a note taker in it, that means someone who has a piece of paper that looks like it's supposed to have notes taken on it. If you do not have someone in your group who looks like a note taker, will you raise your hand? And I'm gonna, and if just one person in your group can keep their hand raised for a moment, George will bring you a piece of paper and designate a note taker. Let me tell you a little bit more about what we are doing tonight. Okay, you ready for this? The theme of tonight's conversations is, you're going to need this. The theme of tonight's conversations overall, these are not questions for you to answer, but they're the big questions we're thinking about together. They are, why do we value being a connectional church? And the second question is, do we value being a connectional church? Okay, so we have designed some questions that we hope will lead you into that conversation, but we are going to begin with some storytelling, and there's a little educational piece of this, because we don't all know how to tell stories very effectively, but there are some among us who have studied and worked on this, and so I want to invite Stacy Current, District Superintendent Stacy Current, to come and talk with us a little bit about how to tell a story.
God is good. And all the time. When I was growing up, I had a very strict parents, strict mom, who made sure that we said things that were good and wholesome and edifying to the Lord. Amen? And what she would say is, no bad words, of course, but you couldn't even say some words that weren't really bad, like the word L-I-E, or I could not call my sister a L-I-A-R, and she could not say that I was L-Y-I-N-G. So when she would get mad at me for saying something, she would say, "You storyteller," and that was her way of saying I was L-Y-I-N-G. So all my life I've been called a storyteller, but it's not, it's not just me. We all tell stories. Every single person in this room has a story to tell. And a lot of times we take our stories for granted. We don't value our stories. We don't tell our stories. We think nobody wants to hear it, but that is not true. And so this evening, I'm going to invite you to be a steward of your story, to take care of your story, to guard it, to curate it, to craft it, so that you can share it. Because not only are you healed by telling the story, others are healed by hearing your story. So a few basics about telling a story. Nobody cares about your resume in the story. This is not about your resume. This is about who you are, what life has taught you, what God has brought you through, what makes you tick, how your life experience has shaped you and molded you into the person that you are. So ditch the resume and show up authentically in 100% vulnerability. That is a good story. When someone is vulnerable, authentic, honest. Vulnerable, authentic, honest. You can't tell my story, and I can't tell your story. Only you can tell your story. Only I can tell my story. And there's a reason for that, because only you know what God has done for you. And only I know the depths of what God has done for me. So when you tell your story, tell it as you. Don't imagine that you're someone else in your head and telling the story. You're not performing, but be yourself. Authentic, vulnerable, honest, ditch the resume, steward your stories. My favorite book is called Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And the book starts out by saying, there are some years that ask questions and some years that answer them. A good story will both ask and answer powerful questions. And so I'm reminded about when I was asked a powerful question about 8 years ago. So I'm going to teach you how to tell a story by telling a story. Because usually most people learn by hearing and by seeing it modeled for them. So really, there's just three things: authentic, vulnerable, honest. Those three things. Ask and answer a good question. So I was asked this question: do pastors ever get afraid? Well, no, we actually don't. No, I'm teasing. Yeah, we do. Do pastors ever doubt? We do. I said, I don't believe you. And I said, let me tell you a story. About 8 years ago, when I was pastoring in San Francisco, I was the chaplain of the San Francisco Police Department. And you have to understand that I've always thought policemen were like Superman, because my daddy, who I love more than anything on this world, my dad was a police officer for 37 years with the LAPD. So I grew up seeing my dad in his dress blues and his badge and his gun, just everything, and thinking that he was like a Superman, and that all his buddies and all the police officers were like superheroes to me. I was never, ever afraid of a police officer until my son started growing up and was a young black man, about 15, 14 years old. And I started hearing about the police brutality, Philando Castile, Oscar Grant, Mike Brown, and I started becoming afraid for my son. Now imagine this. I'm the SFPD chaplain. I'm doing all kinds of funerals and graduations and promotion ceremonies with the police officers, feeling very much called to that work. And I'm afraid of police officers for the first time in my life. I would do funerals and all kinds of things at my church. I think within 6 years, I did over 100 funerals for police officers. And I, their chaplain, began to be afraid of them. But my dad was a cop, and it was cognitive dissonance. It didn't make sense to me, and I was ashamed to say it, because you're their chaplain, for goodness sake, Stacy. How are you afraid of the people you're supposed to be ministering to? And one day my son and I, this 14-and-a-half-year-old brown guy who was getting taller by the moment, and mama's little baby. One day we go to the Starbucks in San Francisco in our neighborhood, and we were the only brown people who lived in that neighborhood. And we got into the Starbucks, and he's got his hoodie on. And I would always tell him, Leo, don't put your hoodie on, take it off, because people are gonna think some way about you. But he's got the hoodie on, and we're in Starbucks, and we're the only brown people. And in come 3 burly cops. And it was like all over the Starbucks, we could hear the room go, because here's this young black man with a hood on, and here are these 3 burly looking cops, and like I said, we're the only brown people in the space. So we order our drinks, and I'm standing there, and everyone is looking at my son and me, and looking at these 3 burly cops, and you could feel in the room, they're wondering what's going to happen, and I was afraid. I was afraid. And so while the woman is making our drinks, and my chai tea latte with almond milk, and I don't go there often, but and my son's lemonade, I'm standing there and I'm thinking, hurry up so I can leave. Hurry up because I'm uncomfortable. Hurry up because I'm scared from my son. Just hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And then I said my favorite prayer to God, which was, help. And as we're standing there, I said, God, give me some word, give me some sign, speak to my fear, because pastors do get afraid. I feel the biggest, burliest cop looking at me, boring a hole through the back of my head, and I turn around and I look at him and I see he's looking at me. He's got his eyes fixed on me. And I start saying, oh no, it's gonna go down. Oh my goodness, what's gonna happen? And my stomach is tense and in knots and I'm scared. And he looks at me and he walks closer to me and he's pointing at me now and my heart is racing. And he comes up to me and says, Hope. Is that you, Lord? Hope, what? He says, Hope. You did Hope's funeral. And all of a sudden, I remembered Hope. Hope, oh yeah, the biker chick who was the biker cop who I did her funeral. And all of the police officers came and they had all of the folks out there and it was a wonderful demonstration of God's love. This black Methodist church with a rainbow of cops outside and all on their motorcycle. Hope. He said, yeah, Hope, that was the best funeral I ever been to. I'm not Methodist, but I'm Catholic. And you know, I've been back to church since then. And I said, oh my goodness, wow, Hope. And everyone in the whole Starbucks is looking around like, oh my gosh. And then he hugs me. And then he hugged my son. And then we all hugged. And then they got us some pastries and donuts, because you know cops get free pastries and donuts. And we sat there and we talked, and they said they'd take my son on a ride along, and everyone in the room was looking at us in awe, in shock. And I had been afraid, and I had doubted, but God showed up. And right there, on that corner in that Starbucks, the glory of the Lord was revealed, and all flesh saw it together. Thanks be to God. It's my story. When we tell our stories, you don't have to clap, but when we tell our stories, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And when we tell our stories, we allow our voices to be heard and hearts to be transformed. And in your story, there should be a hero. And guess what? It's probably not you. It's likely, the hero in the story is likely God. So be honest, be vulnerable, and be authentic. Hear these words from Brené Brown. Owning our story can be hard, but not nearly as difficult as spending your lives running from it. Embracing our vulnerabilities is risky, but not nearly as dangerous as giving up on love and belonging and joy, the experiences that make us most vulnerable. Only when we are brave enough to explore the power of our darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. Be brave, my friends. Tell your story.
Good evening. My name is Craig Brown, and my work with you for the next few minutes is to talk about how to listen to a story. Now, in order to help us understand how this works, let me tell you a story as well. My story is a little bit more awkward, and it goes back many years ago when I was showing up to pick up an individual I was taking out on our very first date. I arrived 5 minutes early, as you're supposed to. I waited in my car until exactly the right time it was to pick her up. I walked to the front door of the home she was living in, which happened at that time to be her parents' home temporarily. I knocked on the door opened, and I was expecting to see this person I was taking on a date, only to find that it is her mother. She invites me into the house to sit down, and I sit there while she works on her sewing. And the person I was going on a date with, her father, walking in and out of the kitchen, not saying a word to me. I sat in that kitchen, in that chair, for 45 minutes. Little chit-chat here and there, but nothing of substance. Well, sure enough, my date eventually arrived. We got in the car and we left. We went out on a hot date. We went to Applebee's. We sit down in Applebee's because it just happened to be on the way to where we were going. And as we sat down to eat our meal, she ordered a beer. I was in seminary at the time to become a United Methodist pastor. She orders a beer. Not only does she order a beer, she orders ribs. Now, if there's any food you don't eat on a first date, it's what? Ribs. So she orders ribs. The ribs arrive, the server comes over, and they have this plastic bib that they want to put on her. And she says, "No, I don't want that bib." The server says, no, you don't understand. You have to wear the bib," and pointed to other people in the restaurant wearing the bib. The server then unfolded the bib and tried to put it around her neck. And this famous sentence was uttered: "Come any closer and I'll take you down." Who was this woman? When you're listening to a story, listen like there's going to be a test. And the test is, can you recall what you heard? Could you almost repeat back to the person that which they have said? When someone's telling a story, it's a good idea to look at them. And that means you're probably not looking at your phone or any other thing, that you're looking at them. Now, let's keep in mind that in some cultures, direct eye contact for a long period of time is actually inappropriate. So figure out how to balance that out in your group. So number one, listen like there's going to be a test. Number two, listen for the heart, not just the point. You see, sometimes stories are not a means to an end. Sometimes stories are the end in and of themselves. Think of the parables Jesus told. How often did Jesus explain the meaning of his parables? Not very often. You see, stories don't give answers always. Sometimes they simply help us form better questions of ourselves and even of others. You see, it's a gift to receive a story. Yeah, in the story we may learn some facts here and there, but facts are not gifts. Facts are facts. Listen for the heart. So, number one, listen like there's going to be a test. Number two, listen for the heart, not just the point. And then it's important to try to share the experience of the person speaking. Somehow find a way to engage with the joy or the pain of the story that they share. So let go. Let go of your questions, your concerns, your criticisms as the other is speaking. Simply try to share their experience. Allow for empathy to happen, not sympathy. You see, empathy is feeling with people. Sympathy is feeling for people. And what we hope happens as you listen tonight is that you'll feel with people and become their companion along that journey. And name the fact that their story belongs to them. It's a story, as Stacy said, only they can tell. So listen to it as if it's their story, not your story. So try to avoid thinking of a story in your life that's exactly like theirs. Just listen to their story. So number one, listen like there's going to be a test. Number two, listen for the heart, not just the point. And number three, seek to share the experience, both joy and pain, of the other. And finally, after you have listened carefully, try and name what you learned or discovered. You see, for that person, their story is truth. It's not just fact. It's the truth that's been formed in them, and it is a holy thing. And that's why stories fill us with respect and awe, because we capture something of the truth in another person. I had a therapist friend of mine years and years ago. His name was Gene Whitney. And he told me once that, Craig, the essence of every human relationship is to be safely known. Those are words that continue to challenge me to this day, that the relationships we engage in and the way we listen to our stories is about engendering safety for people so that they know the space is safe for them. They won't be harmed in that space. But then we also have the responsibility to be known in that space. We have to be honest. So first, listen like there's going to be a test. Second, listen for the heart and not just the point. Third, seek to share the experience, both joys and pains of the other. And after listening, try and name what you learned or discovered. How was that person safely known? So who is this woman that doesn't mind being late, has a beer, eats ribs, refuses bibs, is so certain of herself? It's the most confident woman I know, my wife of 25 years. Her name is Bettina. And if you listened, you will be able to tell the story of our first date.
So now we're going to invite you to tell some stories. Our evening of sharing together is divided into 3 separate parts. I'll tell you about them one at a time. The first section is we want to invite you in your small group to tell a story of something you love about your church, your local church. So we're offering you 3 prompts that are going to be on the screen in just a second. There they are. Tell a story about a time when you realized that you could do more together in your church than any of you can do separately. Or a story of a time when you felt fully included in the community of your church. Or a time when you saw your church demonstrate real courage. Those are not tell a story that captured all those. This is pick one. Pick one of those prompts that just catches you and says, yeah, I have a story about that. We're going to spend about 20 minutes in these small groups. There are 5 storytellers in your group if you have 6 people in your group. That means about 3.5 minutes in each for each person, so kind of time yourself. There will be a clock that reminds you of where you are on the time. This is not a time really for us to talk about the stories. We're not debriefing each other's stories. We are telling stories and listening to one another. So tell a story and listen to one another. Enjoy each other for the next 20 minutes. Thank you, friends, for being so engaged in this. It's fun to watch you in conversation. I want to turn us toward our second round of stories. This time, the question is, tell a story about a moment when staying in relationship with your local church or people in it felt hard. Maybe a moment when you weren't sure that you were included. Why did you decide to stay? Tell a story about a moment when staying in relationship in your local church felt hard. And why did you decide to stay? We'll take another 20 minutes for these stories. Thank you for engaging again and telling these stories. We have one more session. This one will be 15 minutes. This is the one that requires note-taking. Here are the questions, and these are really conversation prompts, so see where these questions take you. This is for conversation in your group. What do we mean when we talk about a fully inclusive church? What do you mean when you talk about a fully inclusive church? Is your local church fully inclusive? Who would have a hard time finding their way in to your church? Is our conference fully inclusive? And who is not yet included in the life of this conference? Okay, so these really are not 1, 2, 3, 4 answers. They're conversation prompts, and so we'll do about 15 minutes in this small group, and then we'll come back together just to close. Okay, thank you.
I hate to break you up. You sound so marvelous. You sound so good. Well, we're coming to the end of our evening together. And from this perspective, it's been a joy to watch you communicate with each other and the enthusiasm. Your hands are moving, you're animated, and you're engaged, and you're intentional with each other. And I just thank God for that. Let's thank God for intentionality. So the goal of this, and I hate to call it an exercise, but the goal of this evening was one, for us to come together as a family and get reacquainted, to be authentic with each other, to understand that our relationships must be real and honest, and sometimes they're going to hurt. Sometimes we're going to say things that we don't like, or sometimes we're going to say things that you don't like. But at the end of the day, we are a family together, and we have to overcome those sores inside of us that never healed. We didn't get enough amoxicillin, so the infection is still there. And so over the next days, I hope that we will get closer to the day that we do not have to have an antibiotic, that our antibiotic will be love. Our antibiotic will be that we take the time to ask those questions and be close to each other, and that we will connect. And instead of walking away when you don't understand or thinking that somebody is wrong because you think you heard something, Step back into that conversation and make sure you're walking away with the truth, because that is the only way we can grow together. You agree? Amen. Did you have a good time? All right. So in conclusion of the evening, say again? Oh, you're hugging. Okay, well, hug. Oh, that's so great. So I'm going to read the Beatitudes of Reconciliation to you as a closure. Blessed are those who are willing to enter into the process of being healed, for they will become healers. Blessed are those who recognize their own inner violence, for they will come to know nonviolence. Blessed are those who can forgive self, for they will become forgivers. Blessed are those who are willing to let go of selfishness and self-centeredness, for they will become a healing presence. Blessed are those who listen with compassion, for they will become compassionate. Blessed are those who are willing to enter into conflict, for they will find resolutions. Blessed are those who know their interdependence with all creation, for they will become unifiers. Blessed are those who live in contemplative life stance, for they will find God in all things. Blessed are those who strive to live Jesus' Beatitudes, for they will become reconcilers. Take a minute with that, because we move too fast sometimes. Where do you fit in? Who are you? What is your why? Rediscover who you are and who God created you to be. Take a moment. Holy Spirit, come. As we end this evening, I hope that you will sleep really well. But I hope when you say your prayers, as my mother used to say before we went to bed at night, because she worked at night, and so she was never there. She was in the city cleaning office buildings. And she would say to us, get on your knees and pray. You don't pray on your back. You don't pray standing up. You don't pray sitting in a chair. Get on your knees. Now, I was 9. I'm not 9 anymore. But we got some nice pillows in our rooms. And you can get on your knees. Every once in a while, it's good to remember where we started so we can remember where we're going to go, and we can vision beyond even when we're not here. God bless you. Have a good night.